Michael, a lot of outreach, a lot of phone calls. Any Republicans answering on the other end of the line?
Well, of course, that's the big question, Steph. We just saw President Biden take off on Marine One right behind me as he takes the show on the road, as they say. It's really a two-track strategy going on from the White House here. The president on the road to Southeast Virginia today, focusing on child care and community college, key parts of that American Families Plan. Later in the week, heading to Louisiana, that deep red state, as he focuses on the traditional infrastructure components of the American Jobs Plan. But yes, for all the public pressure that they're trying to build on lawmakers, a furious round of phone calls, in-person meetings happening with senior staff, with that jobs cabinet, as well as the president himself. We heard, at the risk of triggering your bipartisan horn, some positive signs both from the president and from West Virginia Senator Shelley Moore Capito, the Republican who's also, like her Democratic colleague in the state, key towards any bipartisan breakthrough. We're also hearing White House officials increasingly talk about their openness to breaking up these two large multi-trillion-dollar plans into smaller pieces if it means getting support from Republicans. But ultimately, we've seen from this White House, we've certainly seen from Democrats on Capitol Hill, a willingness to hear them out, but not necessarily endlessly. And if they need to pull that trigger to go through a reconciliation process to get some of these priorities passed, they're still willing to do so. And they believe that they have a good public policy, and that's good politics that will back them up in this process as well, Steph.
I don't know, Michael, that beeping behind you, I actually thought that may have been your own personal bipartisan horn. But you know I have that thing copyrighted here in New York. Garrett, Haake, what are you seeing on your side?
Well, look, congressional Republicans, at least a plurality of them, want to see a deal done on infrastructure. They agree that this is a useful effort by government to take part in. They agree that it's going to cost some money, although there's no agreement on where that money could come from yet. On infrastructure, that's probably the biggest gulf between Democrats and Republicans. Beyond the general price tag, does that money come from things like user fees? We're talking about tolls. We're talking about some way for electric vehicles to contribute since they're not paying a gas tax. Or does it come from raising taxes on corporations like the Biden administration would like to do? On the families plan, the human infrastructure part of this, that's where you see a much wider gulf between Democrats and Republicans. Republicans fundamentally don't think that things like the expanded pre-K or free community college is something that government should be doing right now or perhaps ever, depending on the Republican. And so for the Biden administration to focus their bipartisanship efforts on the infrastructure plan makes the most sense. They have a willing partner there. As we get perhaps later into the summer and the focus shifts to doing more of the families plan, that's the kind of thing that Democrats are going to have to try to make sure their house is in order, because if they want it, they're probably going to have to do it alone.
Let's talk about what could have to get trimmed back here, Anna. Mike mentioned it. These plans could ultimately get trimmed, get broken up. What could that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we heard Garrett talking about, right, which is this hard infrastructure plan, Republicans are supportive of it, but they also want it to be much smaller than what Democrats have put forward. I think when it comes to some of these other issues, whether it's paid family leave or other things, I think that's going to be very, very difficult to find any real traction among Republicans to put this together in some kind of an infrastructure package. So right now, I think what you're seeing is Shelley Moore Capito going down, trying to find a deal on this hard infrastructure package. Whether or not that can come to fruition, I think is a real question and a real test for both the Biden administration, but for Republicans, because at this point, I think a lot of Democrats want to know, are they serious negotiators? Are they serious about coming together to find an actual agreement, or is this just going to be window dressing for them to just ultimately say, no, we can't support it?
To that point, Jake, are you optimistic that some Republicans could sign on to this?
No, not at all. Because the Biden administration, and I see everyone laughing, and because they all know me and they know that I'm skeptical about these things. But Steph, the problem is this. The Biden administration sees raising the corporate tax rate not as a pay for, but as a policy priority, as something that needs to be done. Republicans have been pretty firm that they don't want to do that. They don't think it's proper to break up and to undo the tax bill that many of them see as their big legislative achievement in 2017 when they controlled all three houses of all three, presidency, White House, and the Senate. So I don't think, I'm really skeptical that at the end of the day, I mean, one or two may be interested in that. I don't think that they're going to get, 5 to 10 Republicans who are willing to back some of these tax increases. And furthermore, just one more point here. the size is a major issue. We can't understate that. I mean, the hard infrastructure the Biden administration wants is $900 billion. Republicans are at 400 or 500. So we're still halfway there to what the Biden administration wants. So I understand that it seems hopeful for the moment, but I'm skeptical at the end of the day.
We just got word Democrats are going to be meeting about the size of that bill with Brian Deese, the president's national economic advisor, and Susan Rice later today. And one point, when you talk about corporate taxes, it was former President Trump's economic advisor, Gary Cohn, who has said that corporate tax cut is bigger than it needed to be. It didn't need to go to 21. It could have been 25. When former President Trump cut it down to 21, most CEOs were surprised. This thing used to be in the high 30s. Anna, let's go deeper into the Republican Party, though, because we saw some fascinating developments this weekend, starting with the reception for Mitt Romney, a lifetime Republican at the Utah GOP convention. Let's watch this.
Now, you know me as a person who says what he thinks, and I don't hide the fact that I wasn't a fan of our last president's character issues. And I'm also no fan. Aren't you embarrassed?
Who are we kidding talking about bipartisanship? That man was the Republican nominee for president in 2012, and his own home state was booing him.
Yeah, I mean, if you need any example of how the Republican Party has shifted over time, there's nothing probably more dramatic than seeing the booing of Mitt Romney, once the party standard bearer for Republicans, and now can't even go home. I mean, we've seen this play out time and time again across the country, where you have the real base of the Republican Party in a very different place than oftentimes some of the members of Congress. I mean, Mitt Romney has the benefit of being extremely wealthy. He isn't up for re-election in this cycle. He wants to and chooses to speak his mind, but clearly the Republicans that are very active in Utah aren't having it right now.
Then, Jake, it wasn't just Romney. We saw Republicans going after Liz Cheney because she's out of sync with the Republican Party, a party where the majority still believe Joe Biden did not win fair and square, and where loyalty to Trump is still seen as the number one goal. Given that, is even the thought of bipartisanship a joke? Republicans aren't going to sign on to anything if the majority of their party doesn't think Joe Biden's the president. As absurd as that is.
I agree with you. I mean, I agree. I mean, the climate in the Republican Party right now is not one of cooperation. I saw over the weekend, someone suggested, I think Susan Collins suggested, that we're not Republicans, meaning they're not a party of one person. They are at this point. The litmus test for the Republican Party at the moment, both on the congressional level, statewide level, national level, is fealty to Donald Trump. Whether you like that or not as a Republican is a different issue, but you're not going anywhere if you're not completely loyal to the president. And I would imagine in the next couple of weeks, as we reported last week, Liz Cheney will probably be challenged for her leadership slot again and will probably be ousted. Could be ousted. Who knows if it'll happen?
Then just help me. Help me. I know we're out of time, but quickly. Some of the poorest states in this country are deep red states. They desperately need better schools, better health care, better roads, bridges, Wi-Fi. Don't they care about infrastructure?
Sure, but to ask people to focus on policy and focus on legislative proposals is a really tall ask. I mean, there's a lot of things that are hugely popular across the country: immigration reform, cutting down the national debt, that never get done. So I just think, that's the reality of politics, and I'm not sure how to change that, but that's the reality of politics.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.